The woman collapsed against the wagon wheel, her hand wrapped in a torn petticoat soaked through with blood. Samuel Hartwell was beside her before she could lift her head to refuse him again. This made the fourth time in 3 days. He'd been tracking her wagon's erratic path since Independence Rock. The wheel ruts told a story, uncertain stops, corrected courses, the signature of someone hurt and hiding it. Now he could see why. Her hand was infected. The makeshift bandage hadn't been changed in days, and fever flushed her cheeks despite the November cold. She looked up at him with eyes that were equal parts pride and desperation. "Don't you dare help me," she managed, her voice cracking. Samuel studied her face. He'd seen that look before on soldiers after the war, on widows at the poorhouse. The look of someone who'd survived by trusting no one and expected the world to prove them right. He set his canteen and a bundle of clean bandages beside her wagon wheel, then stepped back, not away just enough to give her space to breathe. "Too late for that, ma'am," he said quietly. "Already decided. I don't need your charity, Mr. Ain't charity." He glanced at the gray sky, then back at her. "Out here, helping each other's just good sense. The trail's got enough ways to kill a person without us adding stubbornness to the list." She tried to stand, swayed, and caught herself on the wheel. Blood seeped through the bandage. Samuel forced himself to stay still, to let her make the choice. Behind him, his daughter's small voice called from their wagon. "Papa, is the lady gonna be okay?" He looked back at 7-year-old Rosie, her worried face peering through the canvas opening. Then he turned to the woman again. She hadn't touched the supplies, hadn't moved except to steady herself. "Not if she keeps this up," he said softly, answering his daughter but speaking to them both. The woman's jaw tightened. She looked at the bandages, at him, at the empty prairie stretching west. Then she closed her eyes. "Thank you for the offer," she said, each word careful. "But I manage alone." Samuel nodded once. He'd expected nothing different. He walked back to his wagon, climbed up beside Rosie, and clicked the horses forward. But he didn't go far, just far enough to give her dignity. His wagon stopped 100 yards ahead, and he made camp where she could see his fire. Rosie pressed against his side as he worked. "Why won't she let us help?" "Because she's scared." Little bird. Of what? Samuel looked back toward the distant shadow of the woman's wagon. Of needing someone and having them leave anyway. The wind picked up as darkness fell. Samuel built the fire high and kept watch. Pride was a heavy load when you were traveling light. His father used to say, and that woman was carrying more than her share. Behind them, 50 yards back, her fire flickered weak and low. Samuel added another log to his own and prayed the night would be gentle. But the clouds gathering west promised otherwise. The first snowflakes hit the canvas like whispered warnings. Samuel checked the ropes on his wagon, then looked toward her fire. It was dying. The temperature had dropped fast after sunset. What had been cold November wind was now the leading edge of something worse. Samuel had seen early blizzards before they came sudden and mean, and they didn't care about pride or plans. He finished securing his wagon and was reaching for more firewood when Rosie called out, "Papa." Her fire went out. Samuel turned. The woman's camp was dark except for a lantern swinging wildly in the wind. As he watched, her wagon canvas tore loose and whipped into the night. She stumbled after it. One hand clutched to her chest, the other reaching futile into the darkness. Then she collapsed. "Papa, she'll freeze." The snow was coming harder now, the wind driving it horizontal. Samuel's hand stilled on the firewood. He saw himself 3 years ago, standing helpless while Sarah labored and faded. Saw the moment he realized all his strength meant nothing against death's patience. Not again. He ran into the storm. The woman was barely conscious when he reached her. She tried to push him away, but her hands had no strength. He lifted her, she weighed almost nothing, and carried her back to his wagon. Rosie already had blankets ready. Bless her. "Get the water heated," he told his daughter, "and bring me the medicine kit." He laid the woman on Sarah's old quilt and unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage. The cut was deep, running across her palm, and the infection had spread up her wrist. He cleaned it with whiskey. She gasped but didn't fully wake, then applied the salve his late wife had taught him to make. Rosie brought hot water and watched with solemn eyes while he worked. When he'd wrapped the wound properly, he pulled blankets up to the woman's chin. Her fever was high, but she'd live. Probably. Will she be mad you helped? Rosie whispered. Probably. Samuel touched his daughter's hair. But she'll be alive to be mad. The storm howled through the night. Samuel dozed in the driver's seat. Rosie curled up beside the woman to keep her warm with body heat. Once, near dawn, the woman cried out a name, maybe, or a prayer. Rosie held her hand until she quieted. When light finally came, weak and gray through the snow, the storm had passed. Samuel climbed down to assess the damage. The woman's wagon was half buried, canvas gone, contents scattered and frozen. The axle had cracked under the strain. It wouldn't roll another mile. He was boiling coffee when he heard movement in his wagon. The woman sat up slowly, staring at her properly bandaged hand, at Rosie asleep beside her, at the unfamiliar walls around her. Coffee's on. Samuel called through the canvas. Figure you could use some. A long silence. Then her voice, rough with sleep and shame and something that might have been gratitude. I suppose I could at that. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is what his heart tells him, even when his head says stay clear. Samuel poured 3 cups and hoped she'd understand he'd done the only thing possible. The thing Sarah would have wanted him to do, help the ones who couldn't help themselves, even when they didn't want it. Clara Bennett stood beside the wreckage of her wagon, one hand bandaged, the other gripping her brother's land deed like a lifeline. Everything she owned was soaked, scattered, or broken. Samuel gave her time to see it for herself. He'd learned long ago that some truths needed to be witnessed before they could be accepted. He busied himself checking her axle while she inventoried the damage. It's cracked clean through, he said finally. Won't make another 20 miles, let alone 100. She nodded, jaw tight. She'd already known. How far to Fort Bridger? 2 weeks, maybe more with the snow. Clara pressed her lips together and looked west. The morning sun caught her profile, sharp cheekbones, determined chin, eyes that had seen too much. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe 30. But she carried herself like someone twice that age. I have to reach Colorado Territory by December 1st, she said. My brother died 6 months ago. Left me his land claim. If I don't file by then, I lose it to claim jumpers. Samuel nodded slowly. That's a hard deadline. It's the only thing I have left. Her voice cracked slightly. My husband died 2 years back. Bank took our farm. My brother's land is my last chance to start over. She turned to face him fully, and he saw the fear beneath the pride. Every man who offered me help on this trail wanted payment I couldn't afford to give. So I learned to manage alone. I'm not those men. Samuel said quietly. How do I know that you don't? He met her eyes. But I'm offering anyway. Travel with us. We're headed west. Get you to Fort Bridger, at least from there you can resupply. Find another wagon train. Clara looked at her ruined wagon, at his sturdy one, at little Rosie watching hopefully from the driver's seat, then back at Samuel. Why, because my wife died 3 years ago, he said. Her and our baby both. Childbirth. The words still hurt, but less now. I couldn't save her. But I can't stand by when I got hands that work and someone needs them. Something shifted in her expression. Not trust, not yet, but recognition. 2 people acquainted with loss, meeting on a frozen trail. I don't know how to repay. I didn't ask for payment, Samuel interrupted gently. Asked if you wanted to live. He paused. Besides, Rosie could use the company. So could I. Clara's throat worked. She looked down at her bandaged hand, his careful work, his supplies, his care given freely while she slept, then at Rosie, who waved shyly. Only to Fort Bridger. Clara said finally, then I find another way. Fair enough. Samuel walked to his wagon and returned with something blue and soft, Sarah's wool shawl. He'd kept it these 3 years, unable to part with it, unable to look at it without pain. Now he held it out. For warmth, he said simply. Clara's hands shook as she took it. The weight of the gesture settled between them, trust offered, boundaries honored, grief shared without words. She wrapped it around her shoulders and closed her eyes briefly. They spent the next hour salvaging what they could from her wagon. Clothes, tools, a small trunk of personal items. Samuel loaded everything into his wagon while Clara watched, her expression unreadable. When they finally set out, Clara sat on the driver's bench beside him. Rosie squeezed happy between them. The broken wagon grew small behind them, then disappeared. Clara's hand rested on the shawl, fingers tracing the worn wool. Your wife, she said softly. What was her name, Sarah? She was lucky to have you? Samuel's throat tightened. I was lucky to have her. Rosie looked up at Clara with solemn dark eyes. Are you going to be our friend now? Clara's lips quirked almost a smile. I suppose I am. Sweetheart. The trail stretched west before them, white and uncertain, but for the first time in 3 days. Samuel felt something like hope. The land don't ask where you came from. His father used to say, only asks if you're strong enough to stay. He glanced at Clara, wrapped in Sarah's shawl, watching the horizon with tired determination. Maybe, he thought, maybe they'd all be strong enough. The rhythm of the trail became their language. Samuel drove. Clara watched the horizon. Rosie asked questions neither adult knew how to answer. By the 3rd day, they'd fallen into an unspoken routine. Samuel woke first, built the fire. Clara made coffee strong and honest, the way frontier folk drank it. Rosie fed the horses, chattering to them like old friends. They traveled until midday, rested the animals, then pushed until dusk. Clara proved herself capable in ways that surprised Samuel. She knew how to build a fire that would last through the night, how to stretch provisions, how to read weather in the clouds. She taught Rosie songs her own mother had taught her, old hymns that floated soft through the evening air. My mama used to sing that one, Rosie said, eyes wide, Clara's hands stilled. Did she? Papa says she had a voice like morning. I'm sure she did, sweetheart. But there were tensions too. Clara insisted on earning her keep, as she called it. She overworked despite her healing hand, pushed herself too hard. On the 4th day, Samuel found her trying to lift a heavy water bucket one-handed. He took it from her without asking. Healing's not weakness. I'm not weak. Didn't say you were. He set the bucket down. Said you're healing. There's a difference. Her jaw set stubborn. I won't be a burden. You're not. He met her eyes. But you will be if that hand gets infected again, because you were too proud to let it mend proper. She looked away, but he saw her shoulders soften slightly. Progress. On the 6th day, they reached a river crossing. The current ran swift and high from snowmelt, dangerous for a wagon. Samuel studied the ford, calculating depth and force. It's manageable, but it'll be tricky. How can I help? Clara asked. Hold Rosie. Keep her calm. I'll need both hands for the horses. Clara nodded and lifted Rosie onto her hip. The child wrapped both arms around Clara's neck, trusting completely. Samuel felt something catch in his chest at the sight. He guided the horses into the water. The current grabbed at the wheels immediately, pulling hard to the left. The horses balked, but he held them steady, voice low and firm. The water rose to the wagon bed, cold and fast. Papa, Rosie called, nervous now. We're fine, little bird. Clara's got you. And she did. Clara held Rosie tight, one hand wrapped around the child's waist, the other gripping the wagon frame. She didn't panic, didn't cry out, just held steady while Samuel fought the current. When they reached the far bank, Rosie was laughing. Again. Papa, again. Clara's face was pale, but she was smiling. A real smile. The first Samuel had seen. It transformed her, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features, and everything to do with joy finally breaking through. That night, after Rosie fell asleep, Clara spoke quietly across the fire. "I forgot what it felt like," she said. "Having someone watch your back." Samuel poked at the embers. "Maybe you just forgot you deserved it." She looked at him then, really looked. In the firelight, her eyes shone. "Do I? Everyone does. Even people who've made mistakes. Especially them." Clara pulled the shawl tighter. "Fort Bridger's 4 days ahead now. About that? And then," Samuel hesitated. "Then my claim's another week northwest, near Boulder Creek." The unspoken question hung between them. "Will you still leave us there?" Clara didn't answer. Just looked into the fire while Rosie murmured in sleep and the stars wheeled overhead. But she didn't say no, and Samuel found himself hoping she wouldn't. A shared trail's always shorter than a lonely one. His father used to say. Samuel was starting to understand what that meant. The trading post smelled of tobacco, leather, and coffee. Clara stood at the counter, counting her last coins, barely enough for thread and salt. They'd reached the outpost at midday, grateful for the chance to resupply and rest the horses. The place was rough but welcoming, full of travelers heading west before winter closed the passes. Samuel was at the far counter, examining supplies. Clara watched him pile items carefully: extra blankets, larger sacks of flour, coffee for 3 instead of 2. He was buying for a family, not a man and child alone. Her heart did something complicated. She used her last money to buy a small wooden horse, carved and sanded smooth. The trader wrapped it in brown paper while she tried not to think about what it meant that she was giving. Gifts now. That she was imagining staying long enough for gifts to matter. Outside, Samuel was loading the wagon. Clara handed him parcels silently, and he packed them with practiced efficiency. Then she pulled out the wooden horse. "For Rosie," she said. Suddenly shy, Samuel's expression softened. "She'll love it. It's not much. It's perfect." He touched her arm briefly. "Thank you." They gave Rosie the horse that evening. She clutched it to her chest and immediately named it Star. "Because she's bright," Rosie explained seriously. "Like Mama said I was." Clara's throat closed. She looked at Samuel over Rosie's head and saw her own emotion mirrored in his face. Later, when Rosie slept, they sat by the fire. The trading post owner had warned them unseasonable blizzard in the mountains, early heavy snow. They needed to reach Fort Bridger within a week, or risk being trapped until spring. "That changes things," Samuel said quietly. "How so?" "Means we can't afford delays. Can't afford mistakes." He looked at her. "Means you need to decide sooner rather than later." "Decide what? Whether you're coming with us past Fort Bridger." Clara's hands tightened on the shawl. "I have a claim waiting." "I know. And I'm not asking you to give it up." Samuel's voice was gentle. "I'm asking what you want, not what you planned, not what you think you should do. What do you actually want?" She stared into the fire. Wanting felt dangerous. Wanting meant vulnerability, meant opening herself to disappointment and loss. She'd sworn after her husband died that she'd never want anything she couldn't provide for herself. But the truth was already there. Had been growing for days. She wanted this. The quiet companionship. The shared work. The way Rosie looked at her like she mattered. The way Samuel made her feel safe without making her feel small. "I lost a baby," she heard herself say, After my husband died, I was 3 months along when the bank came. The stress. She swallowed hard. I thought if I reached my brother's land, I could start over. Alone felt safer than disappointed. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, when Sarah died, I swore I'd never let myself need anyone again. Then Rosie needed me, so I learned to be strong for her. He looked at Clara. But being strong for someone ain't the same as being whole. What if I can't be what you need? Clara whispered. What if leaving means we never find out what enough really looks like? She met his eyes across the flames, saw kindness there, and patience, and something deeper, something that looked like the future she'd stopped letting herself imagine. I'm scared, she admitted. Me too. What if I fail you both? What if you don't? That night, Clara lay awake under stars. Rosie curled against her side. The wooden horse sat carefully on the wagon bench. The shawl wrapped around them both. Fort Bridger was less than a week away. Beyond it, Samuel's claim, and beyond that. A question Clara was finally brave enough to answer. Home ain't a place you find on a map. She remembered her father saying, "It's the people you'd ride through hell to get back to." She looked at Samuel's sleeping form, at Rosie's peaceful face. Then she closed her eyes and let herself hope. The wind hit like a fist. Samuel barely got the horses secured before the world turned white. They'd been 3 days from Fort Bridger when the sky went black. No warning, no gradual build, just afternoon sun and then sudden, vicious storm. Samuel had seen the signs too late, the strange stillness. The way the horses' ears kept flicking back. Now they were trapped in an abandoned line shack, half collapsed but with a stone fireplace still intact. He'd spotted it just in time, gotten them inside before visibility dropped to nothing. The wind screamed through gaps in the walls. Snow drove through the broken door in gusts. Samuel blocked it with their supplies while Clara got Rosie settled by the fire. "How long?" Clara asked, voice tight. "Don't know. Could be a day. Could be 3. Her face paled, but she nodded. They'd calculated supplies for easy travel. Not this. Everything would need to be rationed now, stretched thin and hoped to last. The first day passed in tense waiting. They kept the fire small, burned wood carefully. Rosie was frightened by the wind but brave, clutching her wooden horse and trying not to cry. The second day, Rosie developed a fever. Clara felt the child's forehead and met Samuel's eyes across the dim space. He saw his own fear reflected there. "She's burning up," Clara whispered. They used the last of the medicine, made compresses from snow, took turns holding her while she shivered and whimpered. Samuel paced like a caged animal, helpless against this invisible enemy. All his strength meant nothing against a child's fever. On the third morning, going out to check the horses, Samuel stepped wrong. His boot found a hidden hole under the snow, and his ankle twisted viciously. He went down hard, pain exploding white behind his eyes. He crawled back to the shack, trying to hide the limp, but Clara saw immediately. "Let me see it." "I'm fine." "Samuel Hartwell, let me see that ankle." He sat, and she unwrapped his boot with gentle hands. The ankle was already swelling, purple and hot. She bound it tight with strips torn from her petticoat, then fashioned a crutch from a broken board. "You shouldn't be using supplies on me," he protested. "Hush." Now all 3 of them were compromised. Rosie feverish, Samuel unable to walk properly, Clara exhausted from nursing them both and keeping the fire alive. The wood was almost gone. The food was down to hardtack and the last of the coffee. That third night was the worst. The fire died to embers. Rosie's fever spiked, and she cried weakly for her mama. Samuel lay on his bedroll, ankle throbbing, watching Clara rock his daughter and sing soft songs through her own exhaustion. "I can't lose you both," he said, voice rough. "Can't, not again." Clara looked at him, and he saw tears on her cheeks. "You won't. We're surviving this. Together." She wrapped the shawl around both herself and Rosie, pulling the child close. Samuel reached out, and Clara took his hand. 3 people, 1 shawl, 1 dying fire, waiting for dawn. Clara bent her head over Rosie and whispered words Samuel couldn't hear, but he knew they were prayers for the child, for all of them, for mercy in the cold. The coldest nights teach you who you'd share your last match with. His father used to say. Samuel watched Clara hold his daughter like she was her own and understood exactly what that meant. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, 3 hearts beat stubborn against the dark. Light came slow, gray and cold, but it came. Clara opened her eyes, still holding Rosie. The child's breathing was steady. The fever had broken. Samuel, Clara whispered. She's better. He pushed himself up on his elbows, ankle-screaming protest. But when he touched Rosie's forehead, it was cool, normal. She stirred and opened her eyes. Papa, right here, little bird. I'm hungry. Samuel laughed, actually laughed, relief flooding through him. That's a good sign. They shared the last of the hardtack and melted snow for water. The storm had finally broken. Through the gaps in the walls, weak sunlight filtered through. It was the most beautiful thing Samuel had ever seen. Clara helped him stand, let him lean on her while he tested the ankle. It hurt, but he could bear weight. They'd survive, all 3 of them. Rosie sat wrapped in the shawl, holding her wooden horse, looking small and fragile, but alive, blessedly alive. Clara stood at the broken door, looking out at the white world. When she turned back, her face was different, open, decided. I was heading to my brother's land to prove I could make it alone, she said. But the trail taught me different. Alone ain't strength, it's just fear wearing pride's coat. Samuel moved closer, balancing on his makeshift crutch. Clara, I want to stay, she said. Not until Fort Bridger, not just until things are convenient. I want to stay with you and Rosie. I want to help build your claim. I want... Her voice cracked. I want to try being a family. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. Samuel touched her face gently. Then don't go to Fort Bridger just to leave us. Come all the way. My claim's got room for 3. Got room for a family if you'll have us. If I'll have you... Clara laughed through tears. You're the ones taking a chance on me. Rosie spoke up from her nest of blankets. You're already home. Clara, you just didn't know it yet. Clara knelt beside the child, wrapped her in a tight hug. I know it now, sweetheart. I know it now. They spent another hour in the line shack, regaining strength. Then they packed what little remained and stepped outside. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed. The trail was barely visible, but heading south toward Fort Bridger, toward supplies, toward healing, toward the life they'd build together. Samuel leaned on Clara's shoulder, his left side. She supported him while he balanced on the crutch. Rosie walked between them, holding both their hands. They moved slow but steady, 3 figures against vast white landscape, heading toward distant trees, battered but unbroken, choosing each other with every difficult step. We'll need to sell your brother's claim, Samuel said. Use the money for supplies. I know. You're giving up a lot. Clara squeezed his hand. I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing something better. The hardest trails are the ones that lead you home, Samuel thought. But they're worth every step. Behind them, the line shack grew small and disappeared. Ahead, Fort Bridger waited. And beyond that, a valley with room for 3, a cabin to build, a future to plant like seeds in spring soil. They'd survived the blizzard. Now they'd survive everything else, together. The fort rose from the plains like a promise kept. Clara sat on the wagon bench between Samuel and Rosie, and for the first time in 3 years, She felt like she was arriving somewhere instead of running from something. They'd made it in 4 days, slow but steady. Samuel's ankle was healing. Rosie was healthy again, chattering about everything she saw. And Clara felt lighter than she had in years, as if some burden she'd been carrying had finally been set down. The fort doctor examined them all. "You're lucky," he said, wrapping Samuel's ankle properly. "Another day in that storm and we'd be having a different conversation." "We know," Clara said quietly. She looked at Samuel, at Rosie. "We're grateful." After the doctor, they handled practical matters. Clara wrote a letter to the land office, releasing her claim on her brother's property. A settler family bought the deed for $200, enough to make Clara feel she was contributing equally to their future. Samuel added his savings, and together they bought winter supplies, building materials, seeds for spring. Clara watched him count coins, making careful decisions, and felt proud to be part of it. This wasn't charity. This was partnership. On their second evening at the fort, Samuel asked her to walk with him. They left Rosie with the innkeeper's wife and walked to the small chapel at the fort's edge. The building was simple rough wood, a cross made of nails, a few benches, but it was clean and quiet, and the evening light through the window was gold. "Clara Bennett," Samuel said, turning to face her. "I want to ask you something proper." Her heart stuttered. "All right. Will you marry me?" His voice was steady. "Sure. Not because you need protection, but because I need you. Because Rosie needs you. Because we're already a family, this just makes it true before God and man." Clara's vision blurred with tears. "I spent 2 years proving I didn't need anyone. Took a blizzard to learn the difference between needing and choosing." She took his hands. "I choose you, Samuel. I choose Rosie. I choose us. That's a yes. That's a yes." They found the fort preacher that evening, a kind man who asked no questions about their past, only smiled at their present. Rosie stood between them during the ceremony, holding the wool shawl like something sacred. "Do you take this woman?" the preacher asked. "Every day for the rest of my life," Samuel said. "Do you take this man?" Clara smiled through tears. "I already did. Out on the trail. This just makes it official." The preacher pronounced them married. Samuel kissed her gently while Rosie clapped and cheered. A few fort residents who'd gathered smiled and offered congratulations. Frontier folk understood survival made its own rules, and love was something to celebrate wherever it appeared. That night, in the room they'd rented, Clara took out needle and thread. She spread the wool shawl across her lap and began stitching her own pattern beside Sarah's 2 women. 2 stories. 1 family. Samuel watched from the bed, Rosie asleep beside him. "Sarah would have liked you," he said softly. Clara's hands stilled. "You think so?" "I know so." He paused. "She would have wanted this. Wanted Rosie to have a mother. Wanted me to be happy again." "I hope I'm honoring her memory," Clara said, "by loving you both. You are—" She finished the last stitch and held up the shawl. 2 patterns intertwined Sarah's delicate flowers and Clara's stronger geometric shapes. Different but complementary, a symbol of grief acknowledged and love embraced. Clara folded it carefully and set it aside. Then she lay down beside Samuel and Rosie. This family she'd found in the wilderness. Outside, the fort settled into quiet night. Inside, 3 hearts rested easy. A man's wealth ain't measured in land or gold, Clara thought drowsily. It's measured in who's beside him when the sun goes down. And she was wealthy beyond measure. The cabin sat in a small valley, smoke rising steady from the chimney. Clara knelt in the cold soil, planting winter garden seeds, her breath misting in the morning air. 1 month had passed since Fort Bridger. 1 month of hard work and harder cold, of building and planning and slowly turning Samuel's claim into their home. The cabin was simple 1 room with a loft for Rosie, a stone fireplace, windows that let in light, but it was theirs. Clara pressed seeds into earth and covered them gently. Carrots and turnips, hardy things that would sleep through winter and wake with spring. She was planning a future, putting down roots both literal and symbolic. Behind her, Samuel was building furniture, a proper table to replace the crates they'd been using. Rosie sat beside him, handing him nails and talking constantly about everything and nothing. The sound of her chatter mixed with the sound of Samuel's hammer, and Clara felt peace settle deep in her bones. This was home, not the place, exactly, though the valley was beautiful. But the people, the rhythm, the sense of belonging she'd thought she'd lost forever. A neighbor family arrived mid-morning, the Johnsons, who lived 3 miles south. They'd heard the story, the blizzard, the survival. The family forged in hardship. Mrs. Johnson shook Clara's hand firmly. "Heard you're the woman who walked through hell and kept her people alive." Clara blushed. "We all kept each other alive. That's the way of it out here." Mr. Johnson said, "Nobody makes it alone." They shared coffee and conversation. The Johnsons invited them to a barn raising next month, offered to help with spring planting, welcomed them into the small community of settlers scattered across the territory. After they left, Clara stood in the doorway, watching Samuel cross the yard with firewood. Snow fell gently, catching in his hair. He looked up and smiled at her, that quiet smile she'd grown to love. "You happy?" he called. "I am. No regrets about the claim." Clara shook her head. "Not a one." And that evening, after supper, Rosie climbed into Clara's lap. "Mama," she said the first time she'd used that word without qualifiers, "is this home now?" Clara kissed her daughter's head, her heart full to breaking. "Yes, sweetheart, this is home." Samuel joined them at the hearth. The wool shawl hung beside them. 2 patterns blended together. He put his arm around Clara, pulled both his girls close. "Remember that day on the trail?" he asked. "When you told me not to help you?" Clara smiled. "I remember you smiled and said it was too late." "Was I right?" She touched his face gently, looking into eyes she'd know anywhere now. "You were right." It was already too late. I just didn't know it yet. Outside, winter deepened. The snow fell soft and steady, covering the valley in white. But inside the cabin, lamplight spilled warm across their small family. Rosie dozed between them, secure. The fire crackled gentle. The shawl hung witness to everything they'd survived and everything they'd become. Clara looked around at the rough walls, the simple furniture, the life they were building day by day. It wasn't what she'd planned. It was better. Samuel's hand found hers, squeezed gently. 3 people who'd been lost, now found. 3 people who'd survived alone, now thriving together. 3 people choosing each other, every day, in every small way that mattered. The door closed against the cold. Outside, the world slept under snow. Inside, it was spring. Sometimes the longest journey's the one from "I can't" to "we did." Clara thought, and we did. We really did.